By 1993, Pablo Escobar was on his way out. Everyone wanted him dead. And as history shows, by the end of that year, that would become a reality. Shot dead a day after his birthday.
The killing of Colombian drug lord Pablo Escobar is sending a tougher message. At least that is the hope of Colombian and U.S. officials. Mr. Escobar was gunned down yesterday, and Colombian authorities say its message to other drug lords is to surrender or you will be killed.
With Pablo Escobar gone and what remained of the Medellin cartel in shambles, the only remaining super cartel would be the Cali Cartel. Now, the Colombian government, along with the DEA, would focus all of their assets into taking this sophisticated organization down. At least on paper, anyway. Now, it's not like the Cali kingpins didn't see this coming. Months before Escobar's death, they would utilize one of their many lawyers as a spokesperson for them. That May, said lawyer would organize a meeting with some high-level individuals in the Colombian government, most notably General Gustavo de Grave. In this meeting, the lawyer would state that the people he was representing wanted out. You see, through the Los Chemas days until now, Gilberto and Miguel Rodriguez, along with Chepe Santa Cruz, had amassed a massive fortune thanks to their cocaine trafficking. So the Cali kingpins really saw no reason to keep at it. They wanted to retire pretty much. Now, the lawyer at the meeting highlighted to the officials that about 60 to 120 members of the Cali Cartel were willing to surrender to the Colombian government. I say 60 to 120 as different articles from that time give varying numbers. Anyways, once this was brought up, the officials at the meeting stated that if they were genuinely interested in a mass surrender, they were more than willing to hear them out. In fact, the officials highlighted to the lawyer about a law that stated that if someone were to, let's say, turn themselves in to the Colombian government and willingly confess to something like drug trafficking, their confession would be taken into account during the trial, which would more than likely result in a lighter sentence. After the meeting, the lawyer would relay the discussed information back to the Cali kingpins, who were intrigued by what was discussed. For about a year, further talks about a potential mass surrender were discussed with officials in the Colombian government. But while the Colombian government was willing to give leniency to the Cali Cartel, the US government was not. More specifically, the DEA, creating a constant tension between both governments as the Americans wanted the Cali kingpins to be brought to actual justice. This surrender deal that was on the table would do no such thing. This all came to a head when Attorney General Gustavo de Grave willingly sat down with Elmer Herrera for a meeting in February of 1994 for further discussion of a surrender deal. However, what made this meeting suspicious was the fact that he did not notify a single person about said meeting until some weeks later. Now, when the Americans found out about secretly meeting with a notable member of the Cali Cartel, they assumed the worst. They began to question his side in the war on drugs. This was not the only type of suspicious activity from de Grave. In fact, a source for the Washington Post states in a 1994 article that, quote, within the last 6 months, prosecutors from de Grave's office had flown to the United States to depose witnesses in connection with the drug case. Shortly after the private interviews, some relative witnesses were killed in Colombia. To make things even worse, later in the 1990s, Gustavo de Grave would allege to have not just met with Pacho Herrera, but with Miguel Rodriguez after the Cali Cartel started up their interest in surrender some months prior, which would be further reinforced by documents found at a house in which these meetings were alleged to have been held, dating all the way back to December of 1993. Documents belonging to an Alberto Giraldo, a name synonymous with one of the biggest scandals in Colombian history.
De ustedes depende la presidencia. ¿Pero dónde estás, hombre? En un teléfono bueno. Bueno. Y entonces él me dijo que nos fuéramos mañana a hablar contigo. Pero es que vos tenés que tenerlo informado a él, pues, con mucha prudencia de que este otro señor vino, Santi, y que estuvimos con él y que estamos haciendo, pues, sí, pues, yo le dije eso. Puta, además de eso, para acá vino sí. Joselito y vino ese César. Sí. Llegas y pues allá lo de los corronchos también nos tocó pues al fondo, ¿no es cierto? Sí. Y pues ahora yo no sé, Alberto, yo no sé, Eduardo, qué era lo que dice o qué era lo que trae.
Mira, él habló con los dos grandes.
Sí.
Con el número 1 y el que va a ser el número 1 de los verdes. Y el tipo, tienen pensado llegar a unos acuerdos contigo. Yo más o menos le conté lo que se había hablado. Y me dijo, mira, él me dio carta blanca para negociar.
What you just heard is a conversation between Gilberto Rodriguez and Alberto Giraldo, a prominent journalist discussing the 1994 presidential election. While what I showed you is only a brief snippet of the actual tapes, the gist of it was that the Cali Cartel financially supported the presidential campaign of Ernesto Samper, using Alberto Giraldo as their spokesperson to say. In June of 1994, Andres Pastrana would come into possession of these tapes through an unknown source. Andres was Samper's rival during the election. Immediately after these tapes came into Andres' possession, he would showcase his findings to both President Gaviria and the Grave. After hearing the contents of the tapes, an investigation was launched into the potential involvement of Cali blood money in Samper's presidency. If the investigation were to find that Samper knew about this, well, he obviously would not be allowed to be president. However, Samper didn't have to worry for the time being, as good old de Grave would close the investigation just 2 short months later, stating that there was no substantial evidence to prove what the tapes were saying were true. Okay. In reality though, it was merely because de Grave probably didn't want his daughter, who was the treasurer of Samper's presidency for a time, to be dragged into it. Now, everyone knew this ruling was bullshit, including the public and the DEA. A month later, DEA agent Joe Toff would refer to the new administration as corrupt. It even went as far as referring to Colombia as a narco-democracy, which angered Samper, and in turn further tarnished Colombian and US relations. This scandal would come to be known as Proceso 8000 and would go on to pretty much corroborate what Joe Toff was saying, that Colombia was a narco-democracy. With the tapes leaked and the subsequent backlash, both the public and US government put immense pressure on newly elected President Ernesto Samper to do something to demonstrate that he was in fact not in bed with the Cali Cartel, as he was accused of. So in turn, law enforcement doubled down in their efforts to capture every single kingpin of the Cali Cartel: Gilberto and Miguel Rodriguez, Jose Santa Cruz Londoño, or Chepe, and Elmer Pacho Herrera, as well as other high-ranking members of the cartel. By June of 1995, the Cali kingpins were being swarmed in. Even with their bribes and high-tech intelligence infrastructure, law enforcement was relentless. In fact, it was just last month that wanted posters for the kingpins finally began to be printed and hanged up around the city of Cali. One article from that time notes that the reward for some of the kingpins, most notably the Rodriguez brothers, was 1.5 million Colombian pesos. Anyways, as I was saying, law enforcement was doing everything they could to capture the kingpins, and finally, that same month when posters began to be put up on the streets, they struck gold. Apparently, a CI for the DEA office in Ecuador had a close relationship with someone close with Gilberto Rodriguez. The CI would identify him as Alberto Mayor, who was also referred to as El Flaco. The DEA in Colombia came to know about this CI's info and had him come over from Ecuador to Cali to meet with El Flaco. Once both the Colombian police and DEA saw El Flaco, they began to tail him from the meeting location with the CI to various different locations throughout the city. What made Flaco particularly frustrating for law enforcement was his habit of doing the most random things to confuse them. One of these things involved Flaco taking different routes to a location they could only assume was where Gilberto was at, since he took so much precaution. In fact, it was because of this that it would take over a month's worth of tailing to finally pinpoint the general neighborhood he would go to every day, as they kept losing El Flaco before that. Then, a few days after finding the neighborhood, they would spot him heading down a one-way street that led to a hill with a bunch of houses situated on them. Only problem was that the surveillance team was not able to get exactly close in fear that Flaco would spot them, and in turn inform Gilberto, causing his security team to have him moved. Good news was that they knew the general vicinity where he was going to every day. So what they did next was take a gamble. They could wait a couple more weeks to see if they get lucky and pinpoint the exact house, but they would also be risking Flaco finding out. In the end, after several discussions, they opted to just go for it. On June 11th, 1995, one singular police chopper was dispatched to fly directly over the houses that the surveillance team had pinpointed as the general location of Gilberto's safe house. They were dispatched to hover above this location to keep the ground team conducting the actual raid informed in case anything suspicious was happening. Speaking of the ground team, the team had to take drastic measures to avoid detection, as instead of using the regular police-issued vehicles, they had to resort to hiding in the back part of a truck in order to be discreetly transported to the location. Then, with the help of one of Gilberto's neighbors, they were able to locate the house and raided it. Finally, after moving an oddly placed TV and uncovering a caleta, Gilberto was found hiding in it. He was caught completely by surprise, as the officials that found him stated that the only thing he had on was his underwear and a set of pistols which he didn't dare to fire when he saw that he was clearly outnumbered. And just like that, Gilberto Rodriguez, the chess player, as what they referred to him, was captured. In the weeks following the arrest of Gilberto, other crucial blows to the cartel were enacted, like the capture of Chepe Santa Cruz. Now, unlike Gilberto's capture, where they had to tail one guy for over a month until they could pinpoint the general vicinity he was in, Chepe was simply spotted one day by police when he was eating at a restaurant and was subsequently taken into custody. But the most crushing blow to the cartel was not enacted by police, but instead by one of their own. His name was Jorge Salcedo. If you watch season 3 of the original Narcos series, you know that there is a scene in episode 5 that showcases Jorge Salcedo being called to a remote house after the capture of Gilberto Rodriguez. In the scene, we witness as Salcedo bears witness to the brutal execution of a police captain and the chief of security along with his wife. This is a turning point in the show, as it is after this scene that he decides to turn informant for the DEA. I bring this up because this encounter in the show is loosely based on the actual event that caused Salcedo to look for a way out. However, things are different compared to the show. In real life, Jorge Salcedo was actually called to a remote house just outside of Cali, like in the show. However, this happens in the summer of 1994, not in 1995 like the show portrays it. Also different from the show, the people that were interrogated and killed were not members of the Cali Cartel, but instead Panamanian operatives that had been accused of leaking information about the cartel. It was because of this that they were kidnapped and taken to the house that Salcedo was called to. Here, Salcedo would describe in a 2007 article how each individual operative was brutally tortured and then finally strangled to death once the interrogator got what they wanted from them. This violent encounter showcases Salcedo the sadistic side of his employers. It was a side that he deep down knew existed, but he chose to ignore. In June of 1995, indictments were handed out in Florida to lawyers who were alleged to have participated in acts such as intimidation on behalf of the Cali Cartel. One of these lawyers was named Joel Rosenthal, which I think is how you say it. Salcedo would get in contact with him. Through him, he would in turn get in contact with DEA agent Kasarowski. From there, Kasarowski would have Salcedo meet with two other DEA agents, named Chris Feistel and Dave Mitchell. With Salcedo establishing communication with them, all he had to do now was earn their trust, since it was pretty suspicious to the DEA how a high-ranking member of the Cali Cartel suddenly decided he wanted out. To eliminate any doubt, he put his recent promotion to good use, having been promoted to head of security as the previous one was recently captured. In the early hours of Saturday, July 16, 1995, Miguel Rodriguez was sound asleep in his high-end apartment building bought by his ill-gotten gains. Then, all of a sudden, Colombian National Police came knocking down on his door with a warrant. With no possible time to get to the exit without being spotted by authorities, Miguel would hide himself within a caleta that was built there just in case anything like this were to happen. It even came with a little oxygen tank since the space he was hiding in was extremely tight. This is where Miguel would remain for hours while the National Police searched the apartment Miguel was inside of. Right when they were about to give up hope, however, the police and the DEA agents who had come along on the raid noticed something funny. They felt that there was an abnormal amount of space behind one of the walls in the bathroom. Feeling like this could lead to something, they focused all of their assets into this specific bathroom wall. On the other side of the wall, Miguel Rodriguez was panicking, but he knew that he had to stay quiet or this was all over. It wasn't exactly easy either, as when the officers were testing if their theory about the caleta was true, the drill they were using went right through Miguel's flesh, a painful injury, but somehow didn't make a noise. Still, once the officials verified that there was in fact a big space behind the wall, they brought in a sledgehammer and began to hit the wall. And there it was. They were certain that Miguel was there. They could feel it. They were just a couple of hits away from capturing him. However, the corruption that plagued Colombia decided to show its ugly head once again. One of the many corrupt cops on the cartel's payroll came in and stopped any further destruction of the apartment, noting that A, the warrant they had on was bullshit, and B, law enforcement was not allowed to be armed during a search warrant. None of the Colombian officers were armed, but the DEA agents who had come along on the raid, however, were. And it was because of this that everyone had to leave, since even though the cop was corrupt, what he was highlighting to them was technically true, even though everyone knew Miguel was right behind that wall. This gave Miguel the opportunity to escape the apartment building without further incident after the area was cleared. Now, one thing I've yet to mention is that while all this was happening, Miguel Rodriguez began to worry about something else. Their chief accountant, Guillermo Palomari. The reason he was worried was because since he was their chief accountant, he knew about a lot, including their generous donations to Ernesto Samper's presidency. So he organized a group of corrupt cops that had them pretend to raid the safe house Palomari was residing in. Even though they were cops and he was being arrested, Palomari would be given a false sense of security, believing he would only be taken to jail. That's when the cops would simply kill him, ending any worries about Palomari potentially talking. The problem was that he told this entire plan to Salcedo, who he still trusted to a degree. So with Salcedo now aware of the plan and wanting to save Palomari, he would hop in his vehicle and drive to the location Palomari was hiding in before anything happened. He would rush in the house, scaring Palomari obviously, and told them that they had to hurry before said cops arrived. If Salcedo was seen there by the cops and those cops told Miguel he aided Palomari, Salcedo's cover would definitely be blown. Thankfully, before they ever arrived, Palomari was discreetly transported by Salcedo to another safe house not known by the Cali Cartel. When the cops showed up sometime later, no one was there. This worried Miguel. He figured Palomari must have fled or worse, flipped. However, he would not have much time to worry about Palomari. Miguel got deja vu when he was yet again caught off guard in his bed by the yells of the Colombian National Police on August 6, 1995. He tried to pull off what he had a month prior, but the police got to him before he had a chance to hide properly, caught with no pants on, just like his brother. Miguel's location was given up by none other than Jorge Salcedo. To ensure their safety from any potential violent attacks, both Salcedo and Palomari were taken away by the US. Prison life for the brothers really wasn't that bad, as thanks to the power of bribery, they still had access to anything they wanted, as long as it was in the confinement of their prison cell. You know what's crazy too? Even while locked up, both brothers continued to coordinate drug shipments into the US. The US government knew about their endeavors in prison, but they couldn't really do anything, since thanks to Escobar, extradition had been outlawed for some time now. So any cases against the brothers in the US had to be put on hold. For now, anyway. At the dawn of the new year in 1996, Chepe Santa Cruz escaped from prison with the help of some fake lawyers that came to meet him under the pretense that it had to do with his trial. It wasn't just the fake lawyers, however. Even the guards watching him were in on it. Law enforcement would then yet again restart the process of trying to capture him. But in the end, it turns out they didn't need to, as 2 months later, he was dead, found on the side of the road naked by police. Some months later after that, Pacho Herrera, the last remaining notable figure that made up the Cali Cartel on the run, walked into a police station and willingly turned himself in to Colombian police. He would be sentenced to 6 years for his role in the criminal underworld. In 1998, his sentence would be nearly doubled, the total amount he was to serve being 14 years. He would never finish his sentence, however, when he was shot 7 times in the head while playing soccer in prison, a sport that he was always fond of. If you were to look online, you were actually able to find a picture of his body that was taken right after he was killed. You could see it was right after, since in the picture he's still wearing his now bloodied soccer uniform. Some months prior to the death of Pacho Herrera, a man by the name of Fernando Flores Garmendia was taken into custody by Colombian police around late August. Now, you may be wondering, who the fuck is this? Well, it turns out for about some time he had been meeting with the Rodriguez brothers in prison. About 17 times according to a 1998 article. The US took great interest in Mr. Flores, so they requested for his extradition, and in 1999 it was approved and he was handed over to them. Shortly after, Fernando spilled the beans, telling the authorities that what they had theorized was in fact true. The Rodriguez brothers were still comfortably running their criminal operations while in prison. This would prove to be a big win for the US, as for a time they had believed that the brothers were going to get away without any proper punishment. As while extradition was reinstated in December of 1997, crimes committed before this time were not eligible as a cause for extradition, pretty much guaranteeing that the brothers would never set foot in the US. Officially, they were rotting away in jail, stripped from any power they had, which me and you both know was far from the truth. But with Mr. Flores' testimony, the brothers were once more fair game. In 2003, they were indicted in Miami. According to a 2004 article, quote, Gilberto and Miguel Rodriguez Orejuela face an indictment that alleges 4 conspiracies: to import and distribute cocaine, launder money, and obstruct justice through bribery and murder, from 1990 to July 2002. With the indictment now in the air, it was now only a matter of time until they were extradited. The first of the brothers to be extradited would be Gilberto, in December of 2004. Later that March, Miguel himself would be extradited. Both of the brothers would then stand trial in 2006, where they would be given 30 years in federal prison. They only got 30 years too because of a plea deal offered to them. Had they not taken the plea deal and went through a full-blown trial, they would have more than likely gotten life in prison. With the 2 brothers now in prison, and other notable figures now either dead or in prison, the Cali Cartel was labeled as a defunct organization. Any remnants that made up the Cali Cartel would turn into the North Valley Cartel, but they would never garner the same amount of power that Cali and Medellin had. Instead, it would be the Mexican organizations who would rise in place and occupy the power vacuum left behind in the criminal underworld, further showing that the drug war doesn't really work. The only thing it is successful in is in enabling an endless cycle of violence and suffering.